afternoon. I now call the May 30th, 2023 Administrative Briefing and Work Session of the Marion County School Board to order at 1:00 p.m. Please silence your electronic devices and remove your hats to avoid disturbing others. I now ask the School Board Attorney to explain the rules for this work session.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This work session is a public meeting as defined in Florida's Sunshine Law. This board is dedicated to full transparency in its meetings and its work. In compliance with Sunshine Law, the board has adopted uniform meeting procedures, including the right for citizens to participate. The board will allow public comment regarding any work session item listed on today's agenda at the appropriate time. Speakers must fill out a request form located in the lobby and hand it to the board clerk. After the board and superintendent have completed their discussion on a particular agenda item, the board clerk will call speakers' names in the order received. Each speaker will have 3 minutes. As required by the Sunshine Law, the board must maintain orderly conduct and proper decorum throughout this meeting. Speakers may criticize subject matter and decisions in a respectful manner, but not people. Finally, speakers must be very careful to violate the privacy rights of others, especially students and their family members, by mentioning their names or other identifying information. Thank you for your attention to these important rules.
Thank you, Attorney Powers. We will now begin the work session with the Superintendent's Administrative Briefing. Good afternoon, Dr. Gullett.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. Nice to see you all again. We finished last week. We concluded the week with graduations, and today we kicked off this week in celebrating our retirees. So, and the work continues. So here we are today with long-awaited results of the long-range plan, and we have a lot of information to share, as you know, over the next couple of days. So without further delay, I would like to turn it over to Ms. Debick, who's going to kick us off for today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Campbell, Board Member, Superintendent Dr. Gullett. I am pleased to introduce this afternoon Milgan Camp with Benish, who will be presenting the findings for the long-range plan in the impact fee study. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Camp.
Good afternoon, Milgan Camp with Benish. The presentation today starts with the long-range plan and then continues with the impact fee study findings. It's somewhat lengthy, but we'll go through it. Again, we'll start a little bit on the background, findings, and next steps. So just to give an overall perspective, Marion County has been experiencing pretty significant growth in terms of among the 67 Florida counties. Marion County ranks about 19 in population, 21st and 19th in terms of growth, both absolute growth and growth rate. 15th in residential permitting in 21, and then 22 numbers came out recently, so that ranking moved up to 12 now with the 22 permitting numbers. So basically, Florida is already growing rapidly, and you are growing above Florida average, so that's putting a lot of pressure on the infrastructure. What somewhat moderates that is that your student generation rate is on the lower half of counties. It's 45th out of 67 counties, so that slightly helps. But at the same time, the taxable value per capita is around 44th as well. So that basically says what a mill generates is not necessarily as much as some of the other counties. And of course, millage is one of the primary source for school districts. So that creates a funding challenge. So with all these concerns, the study was meant to address growth-related issues, really take a look at, growth levels, timing, location, what these new homes are generating in terms of students, and how the current inventory can accommodate this new growth, and look at the prioritization of the future projects, update the impact fee calculations, and then prepare a business plan in terms of needs, funding needs, and potential revenues. So today, the goal is to present these findings and get your input. So we start with demographic trends. This chart is going back to 80s, showing the growth rate, population growth rate over time. Green line is Marion County, orange line is Florida. And you can see that for the most part, other than the Great Recession, the county's growth rate exceeded Florida average. Of course, that differential was larger in the earlier years when the base was smaller. As the population increased and the county's base increased, that maybe somewhat became more moderated. But even during the boom, you see a significant growth in Marion County compared to the state. And then projections suggest that it will be either at the state average or higher, depending on whether we are looking at medium projections or high projections. This is showing the permitting trends. Again, going back to 1980s or so, 1990s. You can again see 2005, 6, 7, 8 was the boom, and then we had the recession, and then the permitting picked up again. So over the past 5 years, this is really 2017 through 2021, the residential permitting averaged about 3,500 units. We started our study back in fall of 22. At the time, we didn't have the 22 numbers, so those came out within the past month or so, and they actually suggest 6,500 units. So it's continuing to, the permitting is continuing to be high. But we had some concerns, we were hearing some concerns, whether it's become a recession, this permitting wouldn't continue. So as an alternative, we also looked at the entire 30-year period, and you average 2,800 units during that whole time period. So that's, the 3,500 per year seems pretty reasonable as a target. This chart showing the housing unit projections from different data sources. So when we look at the Beaver medium is about 2,300 units, high is about 46, and in between is about 3,500. Again, residential permitting, 1990 to today, is about 2,800. Over the past 5 years, it's 3,500. Long-range transportation plan is estimating about 1,600, which is really low. So given all this data, for our planning purposes, we use 3,500 as one of the scenarios. And again, just to test it, to make sure that this is not too aggressive, we also looked at 2,800 units. What would happen if, on average, 2,800 new units came online per year? We then looked at where the developable land is. So you can see that the eastern portion of the county has the environmental land, and then the northwest has the farmland preservation area. So out of the entire area, like 1,600 square miles, about 50% is more open to more developable area without significant restrictions. So it's really the true shape of the county in terms of future development. This chart is showing single-family homes built by year, looking at decades, starting with 50s. And, you can see it was in the middle, and then as we continued on, more and more portions of the county has been developing. And finally, over the past few years, the concentration has been in the south. This chart is showing the vacant land availability. Again, that's an indicator of future development. So we have almost 50,000 acres of residential vacant land available, so there is really no constraints in terms of availability of land for future development. Finally, this chart shows the projected developments from different sources. The purple blocks are where the long-range transportation plan is estimating the future development to be, and the darker the purple is, there's more concentration of development. And then the yellow circles are the residential units that are likely to come online next 5 years. Green is the 6 to 10 years, and then the blue diamonds are 10 years and beyond. So basically, the whole purpose of this was to compare where the future development is likely to occur from different sources. So both the ongoing development, active developments and the transportation long-range plans estimates seem to indicate that most of the growth is likely to happen in the South County. We now then turn into what kind of students these developments are generating, what level of students. So for that, one indicator is the age of the community, if an older community has fewer students. So you can see that Marion County has been older communities compared to state all along, and that differential, if anything, is growing. And again, this chart shows the distribution of age, Marion County compared to the state. And green bars are Marion County, orange bars are Florida, and you can see more concentration on the older age groups for the county. And again, this is kind of showing by age groups. About 15–16% of the population is school-age students. That matches the state average, and the difference is the remaining population being more concentrated on the older groups in the county. Now, in terms of the finding, we basically start with the population data, convert that to housing units, and then look at the student generation rates to determine how many new students these homes are likely to generate, and by level. And to do that, we take the student addresses and match them with the property appraiser database to see what kind of housing unit they are coming from. So we looked at them by school level, age of home, on a countywide basis. So this chart showing the generation rates of, again, all homes and only the traditional schools. We are not including private schools, charter schools, just the schools that the school district is primarily responsible for. And you can see that, for example, single-family detached is 0.23, so maybe one student out of every 5 homes or so, 4 or 5 homes. We reviewed different categories and then decided to combine single-family attached and detached together, and then the multifamily together, just by the volume of the housing. So they are about 0.225 for single-family, and then the multifamily is 0.258. This is all homes. We then reviewed the homes that were built since 2017 to see how different it is. So single-family detached is 0.221, slightly lower. In the case of other housing, we really didn't feel like we had enough sample. Townhouses, there were maybe 20 built, condos about 20, so we decided to use the all-home rates for those. We just didn't feel the sample size was there to draw any conclusions. So this is kind of showing the difference. So we ended up using the new home for single-family, 0.221, and it's about 2%, it's almost the same as all homes. And then the condo apartments, we used the all homes, 0.258. We then reviewed the charter school enrollment. In some communities, they are reaching 25% of the traditional school enrollment, so they are sort of accommodating a lot of the new growth. But here, it's pretty minimal. It's about 2% of the enrollment. So we decided that that is, for now, doesn't have any significant impact on your planning efforts. And again, this chart is showing the traditional school enrollment, and you see that the 22-23 enrollment was the highest since the past 15 years. And this is showing the students added per year. For the most part, you've been experiencing increases. Of course, during the pandemic, you had a big decrease, but then you recovered from that and then added another 1,000 students just last year. So when we get to the school needs, we used some assumptions. We are using fish capacity for schools. Prototype size, we discussed that with your staff, and we used 860 stations for elementary school, 1,500 for middle, and 2,000 for high school. Again, we used a combination of new homes and existing home generation rates. We did use the long-range transportation plan to determine which attendance boundaries will have what portion of the growth. So that sort of helped us distribute the growth. And again, we looked at both 2,800 and 3,500 units added per year type scenarios. And then also within each of those, we have a low projection and a high projection. Low projection basically looks at the inventory on a countywide basis, and when there's a need for one full school, it assumes that the district will build a school. High projection looks at more of a sub-areas and try to balance them. to minimize the use of portables and better, I guess, availability of permanent stations. So to give you a summary, with the 3,500 units, we are estimating that the school district will need 7 to 10 schools over the next 15 years. Of that, 5 to 6 or 60 to 70% of those will be elementary schools. And it kind of makes sense because they are the smaller schools, they have half the grades, so they are always the bigger issue in terms of new schools. And then you'll need 1 to 2 middle and high schools. And when we look at the 2,800 units, which is very, very conservative, it only reduces the schools by 1 in total. It's still 6 to 9 schools. So now I'll start going over elementary school conditions, and I'll do this one in more detail. And then, for one, it has the bigger need. Middle and high school are in better shape in terms of the needs. And then, kind of go faster on the other two. So this is showing the existing conditions for elementary schools. The red indicates there's no permanent capacity available. Orange is 90 to 100% availability, utilization. Yellow is 80 to 90. Light green is 70 to 80. And then dark green is better than 70% utilization, or lower than 70% utilization. So on a countywide basis, right now, there's about 765 permanent capacity stations available, but that's with about 850 kids still being in portables. So it's not distributed evenly. So for elementary, again, this is a summary. We would need 5 to 6 schools. And you can see that the first, under the low scenario, first 5 years, we would need 1 school. That would improve the permanent capacity to only negative 325, but then there would be about 1,500 kids in portables. Second 5 years, we would need to build 2 more schools. That would result in about 1,600 kids in portables still. And then the last 5 years, it'd be 2 more for a total of 5. And at the end of that period, there'd be about 1,800 kids in portables. Under the high scenario, we would build 3 schools in the first 5 years. That will eliminate the portables. And then it will be 1 more and in the next 5 and 2 more in the final 5-year period. So this chart, okay, this is the low scenario with the 3,500 units, and it's the first 5 years. Before the construction, at the end of the 5 years, there's about negative 1,200 permanent capacity. So then that would trigger a school on a countywide basis. So after construction, that deficit becomes 326. That would be reduced from 1,200 to 325, and we would still have about 1,500 kids in portables. On the maps, you are also seeing sub-areas, and really the purpose of that to show, even if we somewhat balance countywide, you're gonna have hot spots in sub-areas. There are areas that have a lot of schools with no permanent capacity left under this scenario. So after we build that school, and 5 more years later, we would be ending with the almost shortfall of 2,300 permanent stations capacity, and that would trigger 2 new schools. And once they are built, the permanent capacity shortfall would decrease to about 600 stations, and this would be along with 1,600 kids being in portables. And then in the final 5 years, after we built the 3 elementary schools, but 5 more years of development, we would be short about 2,500 permanent stations, and that would trigger 2 more schools, and after construction, that would be minus 800. So it's almost another school, coming online the year 16, 17 type thing, and we would have about 1,800 kids in portables. So this is the low scenario with elementary. Then I'll go over the high scenario. In the high scenario, what we tried to do, we had 2 sub-areas, and if we were short half a school in each of those areas, it triggered a new school. So it was more aggressive approach to really trying to eliminate the portables. So that would require in the at the end of 5 years, it would trigger about 3 schools. And again, before construction, we would have a deficit of almost 1,200 permanent stations. After construction, we would have surplus of permanent capacity, almost 1,400, and no portables would be needed. So that's sort of a other end. The 5 years after that, before construction, we would have about minus 600 permanent capacity. This is on a countywide basis. We would build 1 more school to balance the sub-areas, and that would result in a surplus of almost 300 permanent capacity and about 800 students in portable, which is comparable to what you have today. And then the final 5 year would add 2 more schools, and it would result in altogether 1,200 students in portables. So that's sort of brings the construction to earlier phases. So we have 5 to 6 schools. It's only 1 school different, but under the high scenario, 3 of those schools are being built in the first 5 years. So that the timing is different in addition to the number. In the case of middle schools, you have some hot spots, but overall the conditions are better. There are about on a countywide basis, 660 permanent capacity available, and about 600 students are in portables. And overall, we would add 1 to 2 schools under low and high scenario. Again, in the first 5 years, there's no need, under the low scenario, there's really no need to add a middle school. There's not enough shortfall to justify it. And then the second 5 years is the same type of thing, although our deficit in permanent capacity is increasing. It's not at a level to require a 1 full school. And then the last 5 years triggers 1 new school. And that would be, after the construction, we would have a shortfall of about 350 stations, and about 950 kids would be in portables. In the case of high scenario, we would build 1 school first 5 years to balance the sub-areas. And then next 5 years, there will be no need for another school. And then the last 5 years, it would trigger 1 more school. And at the end of that, there will be no portables used, and there will be almost 1,000 stations available for upcoming growth. So again, that's kind of showing you the summary. So it's 1 to 2 schools and, moderations on portables. And then high schools, there's about 90 stations available with 1,000 kids in portables right now. So again, under the low, this one also, it would require 1 to 2 new schools, just like middle schools. But timing is a little different. So the first 5 years, there would be, on the low scenario, there would be no need for a new school on a countywide basis. Second 5 years would trigger 1 school. And then the last 5 years, there wouldn't be any. So at the end of the 15-year period with just 1 school, there would be a shortage of about 1,700 permanent capacity, and about 2,300 kids would be in portables. Under the high scenario, we would have 1 school in the first 5 years, and then another one in the next 5 years, and then nothing on the last 5. So at the end of the 15-year period, there'd be availability of about 200 permanent capacity, and only 400 students would be in portables. So again, this is kind of showing you 1 to 2 schools under low and high scenario. So overall, with the 3,500 units, again, we are building 7 to 10 schools, and the timing of it is somewhat different. And under 20, if we even tested the 2,800 units, which is very, very conservative, it's still suggests need for 6 to 9 schools, or equivalent. It could be wing additions and so on, but just that level of capacity. We then looked at what would be the cost of it, and school infrastructure, as you know, is very expensive. And actually, when we look at a community, school and transportation make up about 70 to 85% of all capital infrastructure value. So those two are really the largest ones. That's also reflected on the impact fees. So here, we estimated the elementary school. So our cost estimates are based on estimates developed by your staff, insurance values of existing schools as a base floor, and then any data we receive from other jurisdictions, as well as some discussions with the architects. So based on that, the elementary school is estimated about 43 million if it's for the prototype, middle school about 60 million, and high school about 135 million. So overall, with the 3,500 units, that would suggest the investment of 413 to 652 million, depending on the scenario, low or high. This is, again, assuming all this capacity will be built as new schools, so you have opportunities to add wings and moderate that, and I think you'll see a presentation tomorrow that gets into details of that. So this is more of a high end in our mind. And then the 2,800 units would be about 370 million to 592 million. Our understanding is the current revenue sources are really spoken for, and there's also existing maintenance deficiencies, so there's really not much availability from the millage for new capacity. So then that would require looking into additional revenue sources, and the two options are school impact fees and school capital outlay surtax. So the impact fee is currently suspended, and we'll go through the update study and the findings of that. One question, and again, I'll go over it more in detail in the impact fee section, but whether the rates are subject to House Bill 337 limits, because they are suspended, are they considered a new fee or not? So that's one question. That will determine what can be done as far as the rate levels. And then the sales tax, that's one of the best revenue sources for school districts. It could be up to 0.5%, requires voter approval, and about 30 counties have that. You can kind of see who has it. So in terms of revenues, school impact fees are likely to generate about 525 million under 3,500 units and 420 at 100%, 420 million under 2,800 units. If they were capped by House Bill 337, that amount would be more like 225 million to 285 million, so it would be about half. So depending on that, there will be they may be sufficient to build this capacity, or there may be a shortfall. School surtax is likely to generate about 562 million over a 15-year period, and that can make up for the remaining amounts of the capacity addition as well as some of the maintenance. But again, you'll see a more detailed presentation tomorrow on this. So now I'll move to school impact fee. Would you like me to stop here for any questions or keep going?
I can keep going.
We can keep going.
Okay.
Thank you.
So impact fees were last updated in 2006, and they are suspended. They've been suspended for a while. And the purpose of the study is update the input variables to reflect most current and localized data. It also helps meet the legal requirements. Impact fees, by definition, are a one-time capital charge to new development. They cover the cost of new capital facilities. So they cannot be used for maintenance, replacement, renovation, but they do free up general tax dollars for those areas, and they help implement the work program. And their main purpose is maintaining the current level of service. They calculate the cost of growth, and they are most needed when there's high growth and limited alternative funding. The study is using what we call a consumption-based methodology, which is very common in Florida. It charges new growth for the value of the school infrastructure that it's consuming. And the fees are calculated at a level that they cannot correct existing deficiencies, which is one of the legal requirements. So the basic impact fee formula has the cost credit component, which is really the value of primarily the school buildings, land, your fleet, and so on. And from that, we subtract any non-impact fee revenues that the school district is using toward capacity, since a portion will come from future growth. This net cost gets multiplied by demand, which is measured in terms of student generation rate per housing unit. So for many years in Florida, impact fees were governed by case law, and in 2006, we had the Impact Fee Act passed, and then over time it evolved. Some of its key requirements that the fees be based on most recent and localized data. If there's an increase, there has to be at least a 90-day period before implementation. If there's a challenge, the government has the burden of proof. You have to show that your fee is correct. It used to be other way around. And then there's the House Bill 337 requirements that I'll go over it in a bit. And there's others, but just kind of these are the highlights. So House Bill 337 was signed in 2021, and it put limits on how much the fees can be increased. And it says any fee that increases up to 25% has to be done over 2 years, so 12 and a half. If it's increasing up to 50%, it has to be done over 4 installments. Doesn't say years, but it says installments. And it cannot be increased more than 50% without showing that there are extraordinary circumstances. So if a community wants to increase their fees more than 50%, they have to do a study that shows extraordinary circumstances, hold 2 public workshops discussing those circumstances, and the 2/3 of the governing body has to vote for that increase. So that's, in this case, Board of County Commission adopts the school impact fee, so it would require 4 out of 5 vote. The extraordinary circumstances are not defined in the legislation, but the communities that used it so far show that they are growing very rapidly. So Florida is growing rapidly, and then, for example, like if they are growing even above the state average, they show that their fees were either not been updated for a long time or kept artificially low, and they showed they had they are experiencing significant cost increases. Those were the main I think the items that the communities that use that clause showed. So the study overall, just to give you a summary, cost per student increased, that increases the fee. Credit per student, availability of other funding sources basically decreased, that increases the fee. Demand for single family decreased, this is all compared to your last study, that decreases the fee. So overall fees are increasing for all categories. Okay, so there are several components of the fee. We start with the inventory. The inventory includes only the traditional schools. We don't, again, include charter schools, private schools, or any other type of adult education or anything like that. And there are 49 of them. Facility cost is meant to include all costs necessary to build schools, anything from architectural design, site improvements, construction, FF&E, land purchase. So again, looking at your estimates, insurance values, data from other jurisdictions, discussion with architects, discussion with your staff, we came up with about $380 to $443 per square foot for school construction. That translates anywhere from $50,000 to $67,000. No, I'm sorry, $40,000 to $67,000 per station. However, FDOE requires that school districts do not exceed their published station costs. So then, if that, without, otherwise there's a penalty. So when we use the DOE cost, then the cost per station decreases to about $32,000 to $45,000. So it's about almost like 50% decrease. But assuming that you will try to achieve that, we use the lower figures in the calculation. So it's from that perspective, it's a conservative fee. And then when we look at convert to facility cost per station to student, we look at the availability of capacity versus enrollment. So if you have more capacity available, and if you intend to continue to provide that, you can actually charge the new growth for that. That means each student is getting more than one station. But our understanding is the school district's policy is one station per student, so we did not use that option, and that would have been within 4 or 5% of each other. The other cost components, although not as significant, are transportation costs and ancillary facility costs. So that's the cost of the yellow fleet and so on. So that's about $1,000 per student, and then the ancillary facility cost is another $1,200 per student. Credits, again, are provided for any capacity expansion projects that were funded with non-impact fee revenues, and also any outstanding debt associated with capacity projects. So overall, the total cost ended up being about $38,600, and credit is about $1,500, and the net cost is about $37,000. That's the difference. Student generation rates, again, we went through it, but we basically take the addresses and match it with property appraiser. We use all homes rates for impact fee purposes. That's because the impact fee is paid once for the life of the home, and that home will have different families living in it, and all homes represent that better. Other differences, in the case of impact fees, we subtract the age-restricted units because they don't pay impact fees. In the case of long-range plans, since we didn't know what would be the upcoming units, we did not subtract them. So overall, single family is about 0.288, multifamily 0.262, mobile home parks 0.19, and all residential combined is 0.28 students per unit. So we take the net cost and multiply by students per unit to come up with the total fee. So end up with about $10,700 for single family, $9,700 for multifamily, and $7,200 for mobile home parks. So this chart is showing what other jurisdictions adopted. So we are trying to show here the study date, so you have a sense for how old the data is. Adoption percentage, again, that's a policy decision. The single-family rate adopted, and then the very last column, single-family rate at 100%. And if there was tiering, it's about 2,000 square foot. So right now, you are the second lowest, and of course, it's suspended in your case, but the rate before then. And this is the first set of counties going to 7,800 or so. And then this is the second set going to about 12,000. So you would be on the higher end of the counties with the full rate. We also tried to highlighted the counties surrounding you. You can kind of see Lake County, Volusia County, and so on. So again, we are here to answer any questions. I'm here to answer any questions and just get your input and then go from there.
Board, who wants to start?
I don't mind.
Dr. James.
Thank you. I wrote down the slide number as a best way to ask a question. On slide 24, and this is maybe more a question for a head nod from Mr. Ayers, the enrollment number indicated on slide 24 was 43,199 traditional students, which I'm assuming subtracts our charter school and alternative program enrollment. Mr. Ayers, is that 43,199 on trend with where we finished the school year this year? Yes. Okay. That answers that question. On slide 31, I had this question when we were briefed individually as well, so I wanted to go back, and it doesn't have to be, it could be the slide you're on right now. My question is, the numbers that are on the map I can't figure out what they mean in comparison to all the other numbers on the screen.
Yes, this is us trying to give all the information in one spot. So the very top number, minus 1186, is a county-wide total. Minus 1419 is only the schools in the area within that green line. Are you able to see the green dark, like a thick line? And then minus 494 is only the schools in the blue thick line. So what we were trying to say, on a countywide basis, this is what you have, but look, you have still very hot spots that are really suffering here. So you know, we are doing something, but we still have a lot of problems. That was sort of the message.
So to ensure I understand it, essentially how we get to that 1186 number, because 1419 plus 494 is almost 2,000. So how we get to that 1186 number are the vacant seats in the green area.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Thank you for that. On slide 66, you mentioned the surtax being, the 500,000 being over 15 years. But just to make sure I'm understanding, that would have to be on a ballot every 4 years, correct?
No, they are usually adopted for a time period. They could be 10-year sales tax, sometimes longer. So they would have to be back in the ballot when they are expiring.
Okay, and what is the traditional length of time that we would do that for?
Like, for example, Hillsborough County adopted theirs for 10 years and then renewed. We know of some counties pushing it to 20 years, 15 years, 20 years.
Okay. That makes me feel a little bit better, not knowing that at least it would be for a period of time to get us through what our...
And you need that commitment to be able to plan your facilities. If it's going to potentially disappear after 4 years, it's very hard to...
Yes, that was why I had the question. On slide 75, this is a very specific Marion County question. You said that it would require 4 out of the 5 commissioners to approve the sales tax. We have had a commissioner.
No,
Sorry?
I'm sorry, not the sales tax.
The impact fee.
Right, above the 50%.
Sorry, yes, you're right. So my question is what is the timeline for an impact fee to go in front of the commission? If we presumably say we're going to move forward, what does a typical timeline look like?
I think you just coordinate with the county, and whenever they can get you in, there is not a legal requirement that you have to wait X amount of time. If they can get you in the next workshop or meeting,
Okay.
it can be presented then. Typically, they ask for a school board recommendation. So like it would be first you would vote what you recommend. We want you to adopt it at this rate. And then it goes to Board of County Commission.
I ask because we have a commissioner who has resigned as of July. I don't know the date certain. So we'll be down to a only 4-person commission until the governor appoints someone, which I believe is going to put us, which would be it would not be a surprise. We're going to then be in a stall because we would need then, my question is, would the impact fee be able to be approved with only a 4-person county commission? That's my question.
With four commissioners?
So there's 4, we have had a commissioner resign, the governor will appoint someone, our governor also is running for another seat, so he's a little preoccupied. So if we presume that maybe that seat will be vacant for a couple of months, are we going to be waiting on that seat to be filled before the impact fee could be voted on? Or do we need to know that we need to get this in front of commission before the date of the commissioner's resignation to be able to ensure that we're being timely?
Yeah, I guess if it's 4, 2/3 would be 3 out of 4. Is that, I guess I'm looking at legal, I'm not sure.
Dr. James, I think the business would still go forward, even if there was just 4.
Okay. I just wouldn't,
I'm not 100%
If
sure.
there
of that.
were 4, you would immediately need a vote of 3 out of 4.
3 out of 4.
2 out of 4 would be not enough, so you'd have a 75.
okay, so the 2/3 would still stand. It would just stand with the 4 instead of the,
75% would still be more than the 66% that's required by law. 2/3 is 66%, and the
Right,
3/4 would be,
75.
It would still be more.
so It's possible.
Okay, I just don't want to put ourselves in a
No, I had the
position
same
where,
question written
where
down.
we're hamstringed or whatever the phrase is to that. So thank you. That concludes my questions.
Thank you, Dr. James. Who wants to go next? Anybody?
Well, Chair,
Vice Chair.
thanks. I really don't have any specific questions. I appreciate the comprehensive report. We've all been briefed individually. In my mind, it pretty much confirms where we knew that we were and where we're needing to go. Anyone that lived in Marion County during the Great Recession remembers how terrible that was, and it was absolutely the right thing to do to suspend impact fees. And 17 years later, here we are. So I'm looking forward to solving these issues and working together with the rest of the board and the county to do the right thing for the community, keeping in mind that no one likes fees or taxes of any kind. But our community wants our public schools to be good. They want them to be better than good. They want them to be great. And they have supported us heavily the last few years with, continuing to support us on the funding referendum. Charter school enrollment may continue to go up, but at 2%, that's pretty much a mandate that we continue to roll forward and do what we need to do in the most fiscally least impactful manner that we can. I don't like the idea of that very low number and then ending up after all of that effort being sort of right where we were before. It's difficult for me to visualize the 15-year forward planning, although I understand for tax purposes, that long range. But things are moving faster and faster, these days, and it can be difficult to predict 15 years out. But 5 to 10 years, certainly, the writing's on the wall. We also have a lot of aging schools. So you think, okay, well, if something happened and all of a sudden, just like that steep decrease we experienced in the Great Recession, all of a sudden people stopped moving to Florida, we still have a lot of schools that are in dire need of maintenance that, nobody wants to talk about taking schools offline. But we know we need schools, and we know we need to keep the ones that we still have safely open and functioning. So I look forward to continued conversation about how to make all this happen in a way that is expedient, that truly addresses the needs, and make sure that we keep the community with us, because clearly they've been with us up until this point. And I doubt this comes as really any surprise to anyone that's been following this as we've been going along. So no questions, just comments. Thank you for your comprehensive report.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Vice Chair, Reverend Cummings.
Thank you for the presentation. As our Vice Chair just said, really and truly, this wasn't a surprise to anyone, especially if you've been in Marion County any length of time. We knew where the growth was. We knew where the overcrowding is. We know where the seats are pretty much. So this just confirms what our thoughts were. When I look at this comparison of where we were in 2006 and where we would come to, I'm looking at, I guess this is the one that you have, the counties where we were suspended. Explain that comparison to me. That was the slide number 91.
91.
91.
Oh. This slide is showing what year the studies were done. So your last study was 2006. It was at the time adopted at 100%, and rates was about 3,900 or so. It was at original rate 3,500. It was indexed a little bit for a while, so ended up around 3,900, if I'm reading this right. And then you see the same information for other jurisdictions.
Right. And then the very next slide.
So next slide is, the calculated rate is about 10,700. So that puts you in the second half of the group. And then again, you can see Lake County is at 11,000 or 12,000, I can't read. Volusia is, 88,000 or so, and then other jurisdictions going up to 12,000.
Okay. So when I see this, I see us pretty much being in the middle somewhere statewide. We know that we need some, as the Vice Chair said, we're going to need schools. We're going to need some wings or whatever we're going to do, and trying to get these kids out of these portables and get them to just into a traditional classroom. I'm just grateful for the presentation, and as our Vice Chair just said, I'm looking forward to the conversation on how we get to where we need to be, the destination that we're heading to, and how we're going to get there, and the next steps in us getting this process moving. So thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Cummings. Ms. Conrad.
Yes, thank you again for your presentation. It's a lot of information. I do have a couple of clarifying questions. The first one, I'm going to apologize because I think I just couldn't find it later in the slide, so I didn't write it down. On slide 61, was the land included in those estimates?
Ours, yes.
Okay. Also, for our high schools, is it also figured for emergency shelters?
Not necessarily. So to the extent that some of the estimates we got has them. So what happens with the emergency shelters, our understanding is that not every school is built to that, and depending on how many shelters you already have, you may build more of them or fewer of them. So we did not necessarily try to identify maybe one every 5 high school will be a shelter or not. We didn't get into that specifics. So it may add some more if a given school was built as a shelter.
Okay. Another question that I have is, was there any consideration to building a multi-level school where you had an elementary, middle, or a high school together? And I simply ask because we have a new charter school it's doing that, and I didn't know if that was a consideration.
We didn't necessarily did a combined school. They typically cost at the middle school rate, but you'll see tomorrow a more refined plan in terms of taking this plan and implementing, and I don't remember if it had it, but it has wing additions as well as new school combinations. So there's more than one way to get to this capacity. It may make a lot of sense in one place to have K through 8. So those would all be your next phase of taking this sort of a big picture plan to get into details of first 5 years, what would make sense.
Okay. And then my final is really not a question. It would be a request for the district. I would be interested to see what the school grades are. When you look at slide 91 and 92, and we talk about the percentages that were approved for the impact fees, and how did that correlate with their school grades?
I absolutely.
I feel like that's an important piece of the information as we're looking at improving our academics and also our facilities. And I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Conrad. So it's funny that you're saying that because that is absolutely the chart I have pulled up, and I was going, Osceola is consummate a B, and Collier's always an A, and so I was just doing that calculation going up. The only one that I saw in this chart on page, which slide is this specifically, 92, Polk County is B, C, back and forth kind of on that, but all the others are A or B. And I had gotten as far as Pasco. So I was working my way from the bottom up on slide 92, just to see what those district grades had looked like. I think that was what you were asking for specifically. So that chart I actually have from DOE, and we could, that was the chart from September of 2002. So thank you, fellow board members, for sharing your thoughts and questions. I have a few thoughts, and I too, as Vice Chair Thrower did, I'm not sure that mine are necessarily phrased in the form of questions. A couple of things that I did note that you mentioned. First of all, the 50,000 acres of vacant residential land is a number that stood out to me. It also stood out to me that you said age-restricted communities do not pay impact fees, and I can completely understand that. I believe, from what I remember, about 5-10 years ago, the conversation in the county was we had a silver tsunami coming. And while your charts show that we do still have a higher average age than the state of Florida, the conversation has shifted in the last 5 years to workforce housing. And that workforce ages bring a different demographic of students. And so I think that you have reflected that here, and so I'm grateful for that information. I haven't heard as many age-restricted communities applying for through the county. Maybe I missed that, but it seems as if we've seen a different shift in who's coming and what the residential vacant land potential is changing who's going to be living there. So I think that's interesting to note. I'm also grateful that your maps are inclusive of the urban growth boundary, because I think that was conversation that had not been talked about much within the school system, and how planning was done based on what the urban growth boundary was and then where the schools are in correlation to that. Understanding that we have pockets outside the urban growth boundary that are also high residential areas. I'll use two communities for example, Marion Oaks and Silver Spring Shores. Those are two areas that are outside the urban growth boundary, but the county also has been working to provide infrastructure from water and sewer and all those kinds of things as well. Like there's infrastructure plans happening outside the urban growth boundary, but they've identified those as well. The two things, I guess, where I am with this now, this has been very, very helpful. Again, not something that we were surprised by, but it's helpful to have it all connected, third-party independent voice telling us the things that we, or I personally, have believed for some time. Slides 89 and slides 90 were where I was kind of landing, because I believe this is probably the conversation where we take it from here. And granted, we know that we have conversation happening tomorrow directly from our district staff to say, okay, now what? And they're going to present some of that to us tomorrow. But a part of that now what question for me is on slide 89 specifically, because these are different student generation numbers than we have been giving, a little lower actually than the one we've used for single family, but much higher than the one we've used for multifamily. And maybe this is a question for tomorrow, but to say, at what point do we as a district start telling the city and the county, these are our new numbers that we need to go with moving forward? Because I'm not certain that that's a vote that we have to take, or anybody. This is just when they come to us and say, what is your number? And this is the number based on the units. Is that a question for tomorrow? I'm kind of looking at our team. I don't know if that's a... If we want to address that tomorrow, that's fine. It's just kind of a question. Now that we have it concretely, yeah. At what point do we start actually sharing that? And thank you, Mr. Hurley, for coming forward to answer that for me.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. Directly, I believe that's a matter of once the study gets to the county commission, where they are the levying body. So these rates would go hand in glove with the impact fee itself. And so at such a time as they adopt that, and it would be implementable. I wasn't here the first time we did the impact fee in 2006, but just intuitively, you know, that seems to make sense to me that once it's approved as a package, then it would be instituted, and it has to be advertised. I believe it's a 90-day period.
Thank you, Mr. Hurley. So the timeline of the student generation rate is separate or is actually in tandem with the impact fee, and that's where, for example, at planning and zoning, as you know, we participate in those. Planning and zoning, you have a developer come in and the city calls you from planning and zoning and asks, based on this, and a part of the staff report, it includes, this is the amount of students we believe will be the impact of this particular development. Is that something that we have to have approval from the county or the city to just start using these new numbers? Or is that something that we can start tomorrow?
Right. So if Nilgan would join me here, I mean, she has the benefit of doing work all throughout the state, and it sounds like she says it could be either way.
I think this part of if you accept the study you're comfortable with our data, I don't think that necessarily needs adoption from the county, because that's more information about demographics. It's not really a rate adoption. Or they may also say, yes, we are comfortable with this data, we are comfortable with these student generation rates apart from the rates themselves. So I think it will have a sort of a lower threshold as far as.
Okay. And that answered my question, because regardless of what we determine to do about impact fees, so we haven't had that conversation, and that's my next question, because that's slide 91, or excuse me, slide 90. But regardless of what we choose to do on impact fees, this information is something we could start using very soon as you work with the staff from the city and the county on development projects and what's coming forth to know the potential student impact based on development.
Yes, I'll take that lead.
Okay. That was, going to be my first question, because again, sitting in planning and zoning, we see those numbers, we see, and the conversation always comes up, what's going on with Saddlewood, or whatever's happening there. And so to know that we potentially would be changing this, because while the study here, and I'm thankful that you did mention that there was a low bit of information on multifamily developments that you were able to even generate numbers from. However, we do know that the large number of multifamily developments is coming online, or at least being applied for currently. And so we're seeing that a lot. And so even just having a new number that shows the potential impact is, I think, going to help that conversation a bit. So understandably, you didn't have as much information as what I'm currently seeing, at least in the city of Ocala planning and zoning. So as a recommendation, I guess I don't know if we need consensus or what have you, but if we're accepting these findings, these numbers, in my opinion solely, we need to move forward with ensuring that anytime we have a call from staff at city and county, that we're using these numbers at least for that student generation conversation. Would you all agree with that thought process? I mean, if we accept this study as is, I mean, this is the data. Well, Vice Chair.
Of course, it makes sense to go with the most up-to-date numbers.
Okay. So that would be first recommendation off of this report, that we can go ahead and start using that information, because that doesn't take anybody else's vote to say, at least just for information's sake, as we're talking to growth development offices with the county and the city and Bellevue and everyone else. So that's step number one. Yay. Okay. Step number two is on, thank you, Mr. Hurley, is on the impact fee schedule. So this would be the very next slide, slide 90. So I'm certain that this conversation doesn't need to necessarily occur as a whole today, but I do think that we as a board could have some conversation specifically about the impact fees and the recommendations here presented out of this study. And then obviously the team tomorrow is going to give us even more information off of that. But this is a very comprehensive study. There's a lot of detail in it. When we looked at 98 slides, we thought we were going to be here for 4 hours, and we've only been here for an hour, so that's pretty good. Thank you for your expediency in that regard. But board, I'm open to hearing from you, or potentially any additional questions that you have specifically about slide 90. Also in conversation with the slide that did show the other districts around us and the other districts in the state of Florida, just kind of as a temperature gauge of what your thoughts are on impact fees.
Chair,
Yes, Dr. James.
my question's for Attorney Powers. On slide 75, it noted the rules governing essentially adopting an impact fee in the House bill. Where are we with, what does that look like? So we have a number presented here on the slide. Where do we fall with that House bill and what we can ask for?
I need to get some more context for that question. Can you ask me what
Okay, slide 75.
I'm looking at? It?
Okay, my understanding is there are limitations with how heavy of an impact fee we can ask for.
You talking about the rate cap?
Yeah,
Okay. Yes, that would be important to know.
One question on that I think we need to figure out, because your fee is suspended, so this bill doesn't apply to new fees, because there's nothing to compare, 50% zero. Now, your fee is suspended as well, so it's zero. I don't know if it can be treated like a new fee, or does it have to go to the rate before the suspension? So I think
that's essentially my question.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, developing a new impact fee entirely would, obviously, if assuming that there was zero impact fee, you can never increase zero by 50%, right? So what we would be looking at here is within the standards that are set, there's a certain annual increase that's allowed. There's also a cap. There's also within statute the ability for us to expand beyond that cap as long as we have extraordinary circumstances and are able to articulate what those are. Part of ours could indicate, and the consultant can feel free to absolutely chime in if anything I'm saying concurs with or does not with what you're saying. But when we've got to the point that we are going to justify perhaps an increase that would be beyond that is even capped, we'd need to be able to articulate the reason for doing so. And the reason for doing so could be a very valid reason, particularly given the fact that we haven't collected any impact fee for a long period of time. The fact that impact fees have not been collected for that period of time is essentially a multi-year cost savings to taxpayers, and now there's to the developers. So now this is at a point where it's come due. So in looking into this and discussions also that I've had with our staff, it appears that we would fit the criteria that we need to be able to ask for whatever impact fee that is necessary. And then that would be depending upon which of the plans that we, alternately choose to work out. That's a conversation to be had between the county commission and us.
Okay, so
I don't get the sense that we're limited.
So in summary, the 10,693, presume as one of the numbers on slide 90, could be the number we ask for. Okay, that's what I wanted to get clarification on. With regards to that, though, that would be an exception then, right? We would have to be following the rules of an exception?
Was it extraordinary?
Extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah, we would, under exception, we would have to be, we've obviously done the study, 2 public workshops to discuss that. Does that include today?
No, they need to be
have to have-
advertised.
The discussion would include today as part of the history, but that's something that would have to actually be part of the county commission and public hearings as well.
Understood. I'm just trying to get a grip on the timeline.
So 2 public workshops for the extraordinary circumstances have to be dedicated to extraordinary circumstances. They need to be advertised as such. They don't need to be BCC workshops. They are public workshops. So you can invite everybody and have it at a school or just like a regular public workshop, but they need to be advertised as such. Timeline-wise, what some jurisdictions did, for example, to save time, they did the second workshop right before the board meeting that would adopt the recommendation or whatever the case. So that just, both meetings were in the same day. So that saved a little bit of time.
So to clarify, because I'm not sure we were all on the same page, The two public workshops are Marion County Public School workshops or Marion County Commission workshops?
Public school workshops.
Okay.
Yeah, like where I declare a public hearing. and-
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify because there was,
Yeah, there is no requirement of like adopting anything for the extraordinary workshops. You can hold them, you know, school board can decide, we have these circumstances and we want to communicate that, here they are. And then Board of County Commission has still the ability to accept, reject. But
Okay.
they don't have to approve for you to have extraordinary
yes.
circumstance public workshops.
But to be clear, this does not count as our first.
No.
No,
So we would have to have two further public workshops and then a board meeting. And then we would send it to county commission, who would have to have it on a board meeting.
And the public workshops in that case are public workshops specifically, not necessarily an entire work session, but a public hearing and public workshop that deals specifically with that set of circumstances.
Yes, I understand now. I just wanted to clarify that language for the exception.
And we will obviously need to make a determination as to when we do that portion, because if we're going to be asking for the implementation, certainly the county doesn't have to approve or not approve of whatever our plan is, but ultimately, as far as the impact fee goes, what does the county have control over as to the impact fee amount should we choose to adopt extraordinary circumstances versus if we didn't?
they have the same flexibility as always. They can adopt it at 50%, 70%, not 100%. Yeah.
So we would be effectively going and saying, here's the amount that we think needs to happen, but that may be cart before the horse, because when it gets to the county commission, that discussion is likely to be held again.
Mm-hmm.
So
Thank you for the
it's a
clarification.
requirement, but it's not sufficient alone.
Thank you, Dr. James, and thank you for that clarification, because I was misunderstanding that the two public workshops can actually be Marion County Public Schools public workshops and not required that the county commission holds those. So that's helpful for that clarification. But as Dr. James previously indicated, with our unique circumstances with our upcoming Board of County Commissioners makeup, timing potentially could be of the essence. And it won't matter necessarily, depending on the timeline, as to whether we get, we'll need 3 out of 4 votes regardless, because that's still a majority, and it would be a 2-2. So we still would need 3 if, in fact, we're not able to get this done in the month of June, which, based on what you just said, I'm not certain that we could get this done in the month of June, but maybe we could. I don't know what the county's schedule is for their meetings, or when we would have the ability to even put it on one of their agendas. I see Ms. Straub, perhaps she would like to explain that to us. I was going to have you come up during public comment, but Tracy, I would love to have you speak to us now. Thank you so much for being here today.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Tracy Straub, Assistant County Administrator with the Marion County Board of County Commissioners. So your Board of County Commissioners meets on the first and third Tuesday of every month. Our agenda deadline is always, it's 2 to 3 weeks before that meeting to get you onto the publication. And with July coming up and being a holiday, we only have the one meeting in July, which is the one towards the end of the month. I would suggest you'd be pressing hard to make it to a June meeting. And I would recommend that you put your recommendation in front of the board and not ask the board to just make it a blanket, whatever they'd approve. I have no doubt they'd want to know what you would recommend.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely, yes. We'll be putting forth a recommendation for sure. Dr. James, you have a question for Ms. Straub?
Since this Thursday, the 1st, is the first Thursday of the month, does that mean that you guys, your meetings in the month of June are the 1st and the 15th? And if so, then we have expired the timeline for a June meeting.
Our meetings are the first and third Tuesday of the month.
Tuesday, I'm sorry.
So we are going to be publishing tomorrow and meeting on the June 6th.
So for the June 20th meeting,
Our deadline is June 8th.
And I need to check on something before we do that. I can do it today and get back with individual members of the board, but for public workshops and work sessions, sorry, not work sessions, but public hearings, public workshops, typically those require a 14-day notice because they involve some level of rulemaking and development. So I'll need to consider whether that's the case with this particular item or not. I mean, if the consultant knows immediately, she can let me know, but I don't. This may be something that has a 14-day notice requirement.
My other question is, can we, and this may not be for you, but can we request to be added to a county commission agenda without checking all the boxes on our part? And then obviously if we don't get what we need to be done, we can obviously be removed from the agenda, but we could presumably be a placeholder on the agenda for the 20th meeting?
I have no doubt we would work with you to do that. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Straub, for answering those questions for us.
Just Eric.
Yes, Vice Chair.
Thanks. Getting back to Board Member Conrad speaking about our sheltering and what that takes. And so I was glad to hear you raise that point. I do know that in order to be able to really increase our sheltering capacity over the past few years, and this is where the community partnerships are so golden. Preston Bolin from the Emergency Operations Center was able to come up with sources of funding to really help us expand the number of people that we can safely shelter. And so I would like to think that moving forward, as we begin to build more schools, it would seem like it would make a lot of sense for our newest schools that would more than likely be the safest in terms of providing sheltering capacity. So that was a great point that you brought up, Board Member Conrad, and it does just speak to the community unison that it takes to build a strong community and have everything that we know we need and want. I feel like I would need to get a lot more information tomorrow about the details of building wings versus building more schools, things like that. Sure, I bet there's a tremendous justification for extraordinary circumstances. I don't think I saw but maybe one or two other counties that have gone as long as we have without having an impact fee, and maybe I don't know that any of them have gone 17 years, although I did see Miami-Dade, 1995.
Yes.
Could you explain that, please?
So if Miami-Dade is actually talking about updating because they got sort of unofficial warning that they are not a very safe ground with that. But so if that fee were to challenge, they would have a very hard time showing it's valid and current. But when the fees are very low, they usually don't get challenged. So that's basically where they are. They haven't updated. I guess there was an interest, but now we heard that they are considering because they are a little bit worried about being so out of date and also all the revenue loss.
Thank you. And you know, we went as long as we could, I think. And again, you know, anyone that lived here during that time knows how hard it really was. However, I would like to continue to look at being as fiscally responsible as possible while still meeting the needs that we know we have, so that we don't end up going for, but you know, this is a double-edged sword because you don't go for what you think you're really going to need maybe on the high end, and then it is such a process to try to come back and ask for more. I get all that, but I'm looking forward to tomorrow's conversation to where ideally we can get the impact fees that we know that we need, not have to go to extraordinary high rates. That makes it difficult and problematic for a lot of people, and just continue to, you know, do the right things.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Reverend Cummings, I'll come to you in just 1 second because Vice Chair Thrower did mention something back on slide 91. Of all of those fees, though, that you have listed us with comparable counties or any counties at all, are we the only county that has them suspended? Because based on that chart, while we have an adopted number, two more, there you go. You do note that we're suspended. So while Miami-Dade does have a very low rate, they're still collecting it.
Yes.
And so is there anyone else that still has their fees suspended?
Yeah.
Or maybe that's,
They are not on this list. They are usually not on this list if suspended, but I know Hendry County has all their fees suspended and they are studying them now.
okay.
So there may be others.
Hendry? I don't even see Hendry.
Yeah.
Because they're suspended. Okay. So all of these have
All of
current.
these have low rates, but they have at least been collecting them and have been collecting them for some time.
Right.
Yes.
So again, 17 years of uncollected impact fees certainly adds up to a lot. Okay. Reverend Cummings.
Thank you. Question. There was a slide on here that talked about the cost of building new schools, and in that cost analysis, is it taking into consideration the cost of the school hardening, the new mandates and things that we've got for school hardening? Are those costs included in those projections?
They are really to what standards more currently built schools are being built. So it's the construction cost figures from recently built schools, your estimates, the staff's estimates. So to the extent that they are doing that, it's included.
Just to build a modern school.
Mm-hmm.
And I ask that because I know we consistently, safe schools continue to get different mandates from Tallahassee. So just want to make sure that we're looking at, and I know costs change all the time, but I just want to see how good that number was.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And for the board, the statute we're referring to is 163.31801. I'll make some notes and send that out to all board members. The paragraphs under that, it's going to be under section 6. Paragraphs under that say local government, school district, or special district may increase an impact fee only as provided. And it talks about the 25%, but not to exceed 50%. That's in items B through D. Then the exception that we're talking about comes down to item G. And that says a local government, school district, or special district may increase an impact fee rate beyond the phase-in limitations established under paragraph B, paragraph C, D, or E by establishing the need for such increase in full compliance with the requirements of subsection 4, provided that the following criteria are met. One is what we're here today for, and that is a demonstrated need-based study justifying any increase in excess of those authorized in paragraph B, C, D has been completed within the 12 months before the adoption of the impact fee increase. So that's sort of the point of why we are where we are. But yeah, under that extraordinary circumstances test, once our study has justified what the need is for us to meet the numbers that we need in conjunction with other planning, that's what we'd present.
Thank you. And for an impact fee conversation, so Vice Chair Thrower, I appreciate what you were saying, that hearing from the team tomorrow and seeing what the justifications of the needs are and what the recommendations are. But as we collect impact fees, the purpose of those impact fees would be directly to impact the community in which they're collected. Or is it just all of this money goes into our capital outlay fund and can be used wherever the need is?
They are usually kept in a separate fund, and they can only be used for capacity expansion, but it can be anywhere in the county. So school impact fees are typically a single benefit district because you are able to change your attendance boundaries. There's a bigger emphasis on school choice. So kids are not necessarily staying within their attendance zone. So that's why there are not multiple benefit districts that would restrict where you spend them.
And likewise, a restriction in one area likely leads to depressurization in another. So.
Right. And I thought that was the case, but I just wanted clarification on that. Thank you. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, based on this conversation, until I hear tomorrow's conversation, I'm not ready to make nor agree to any recommended amount of impact fee today.
I'd like to ask a hypothetical for planning purposes. I'm a backwards planner. I like to get to the end and work my way there. So that I understand, we have to have 2 public hearings and a board meeting to adopt this and then send it off to county commission. Is that correct?
Yes, if you go to extraordinary circumstances.
Yes.
Did we decide, I guess I'm asking legal, that suspended fees are not considered new fees?
I don't have a firm legal
Okay.
answer. I'll need to.
If they are, if they reach that conclusion, then you don't have to do the extraordinary circumstances. You can just start discussing because new fees are not subject to House Bill 337.
That's really going to be an important answer to get.
Yes, and so I asked that because if we were to backward plan, we're very compressed in a 14-day notice window for a public hearing. To get us to where we need to be for a June county commission meeting, we're incredibly tight on a timeline.
Does it say public hearing or public workshop? How does the statute read? Does it say public hearing? Because technically the rulemaking doesn't come from us. The rulemaking will come from county commission. Because we're not making the rule, we're making the recommendation. I wouldn't see it personally, if I'm interpreting, unless the words are actually public hearing. If it says public hearing.
The local government jurisdiction has held not less than 2 publicly noticed workshops dedicated to the extraordinary circumstances necessitating the need to exceed the phase-in limitations set forth under paragraph B, C, D, or E.
And dedicated solely, or could be on an agenda, as an agenda item?
Well, we typically do workshops in conjunction. It's an agendized item.
Okay,
And it doesn't have to be the only thing on the agenda. That's irrelevant.
okay. Because if we have a 14-day window of notification, do we have that 14-day window? Or no, is it only 7 days?
Yeah, that's what 15 minutes ago I said I'd need to look into that. 'Cause
No, I
I have
understand.
not done so in
Yeah. No, I understand that, because what I'm just thinking is like the week of the 12th is essentially the week that we would have to get a lot accomplished, it looks like.
Which the 13th is already a scheduled board meeting, so we could have a workshop ahead of that board meeting as well. So that could be one of them for sure. Ms. Conrad?
Attorney Powers, are there any restrictions on how close the workshops have to be, or could we?
Not from statute, not from what's here.
So if we wanted to offer one in the morning and in the evening to the public?
Same day?
I'm just saying, you're available before work or after work? That's just an idea, just as we're working on a crunch timeline.
It could be back to back, from my understanding. It doesn't have to be the same day, but it could be the day and the next day.
Monday and Tuesday.
I don't know, guys.
No, I'm like,
I think when dealing with the public, we want to be as transparent as we can.
Yeah, that just seems like jackhammering it through. Sorry, Chair. Yeah.
But we want to just do it in full transparency, how we do it. But we
Give
are
people time.
on a time schedule.
well, the reason we're trying to expedite this, again, to go back to the original, is because of the need for the June 20th county commission meeting. If we're trying to make that date, otherwise we don't make it until July 18th would be the date that we would be on a county commission. And then keep in mind, whatever their approval is or not that day, then a 90-day time frame begins. And so the collection still is not beginning for at least 90 days after the, so we need to get our part in order so that we can get to the county sooner rather
I
than
mean, that's
later.
my purpose of trying to backwards plan
Right.
into it, is just to get a real grip on, like, is it possible? And I appreciate Vice Chair Thrower's sentiment. And so for me, it's like, could we possibly have a discussion about dates? And then after tomorrow's presentation, have a greater conversation of whether we're even interested, but to at least pinhole some dates. If we're working on a timeline, because 14 days from now is literally like the week we would have to get it accomplished. So that's my only reason for trying to at least pin down some dates. And then if we don't use them, we don't use them, but at least we have them.
Vice Chair.
Thanks, and understood. And at the same time, I also think that it's really important to make sure that the public has plenty of notice, that they're well aware that we build the same support for this as we have for other funding initiatives that have served us well. We certainly are expert at having quick meetings. We can pull it together, we can make it happen, our staff just steps it up, we show up, we do. But I certainly do want to make sure that we are being very transparent and also trying to think of the right adjective, measured, What we're going to be asking for is a lot, and so I just want to make sure that we're being very prudent in how we approach it. And we've been working on this for a very long time, and if we get those dates and we make it, and it feels right to make it all try to happen in June, but July is not that much further away either, and I'm all about, I think I was the one that said the other night, for God's sake, could we just get started on something? and I really do want to do that, because I know we need it. It just feels a little hurried to me, but that's me.
And I appreciate that, Vice Chair Thrower. It does feel a little hurried, but again, we know what the month of July looks like, because we only have one meeting in July too. That's why we have 14 in June. Kind of joking, but kind of also not joking, since we're together today, tomorrow, Thursday, etc. So but I appreciate it. I also understand that it does look like it's a lot that we potentially could be asking for, but people have known this was coming, and we've been waiting for quite some time to get these numbers, and we have had 17 years without a fee like this, and so from those that are coming into this county that are out-of-town developers, the information I always receive from folks is they're shocked that there isn't any money at all that they have to contribute to schools, at all ever, because we've been suspended for 17 years. And so while we have a student generation number that we give them, this is the impact you're potentially going to have on us. We're not asking you for anything for that, though, and that's been the conversation for 17 years. So, and that's local and out of town. I mean, everybody understands that. So we'll figure out what that number is. I appreciate that we're needing to have additional conversation tomorrow. I think this is a great jumping off point. I know it's taken us a bit to get here today. I know I'm grateful for all the work that your team has put in and the information on paper that we now have justifying the conversation we've been having up here and just individually with, in the community that I've been having with other community leaders. We now have it on paper to justify the real conversation with real numbers. Board, is there any additional? Dr. James.
Is the recommendation of your company to adopt this impact fee at 100%?
We actually don't necessarily recommend a rate. Basically, technical study calculates the cost of growth. This is the full cost of growth. After that, it's really, and we show you through the long-range plan, this seems to be your needs. Again, that's a tool, like that needs to be reviewed every few years, but right now, when we look out, these are the needs, these are the revenues. But after that, it's really policy decisions. Some communities have a lot more portables. I mean, they don't necessarily like it, but they are fine with it. Some communities really don't like them. They build a lot of schools. So it's not really our place to tell you what to do. These are just the technical tools, and then after that is a policy decision, what the community wants, how they want to fund things. So if you pass the sales tax, that may be a different conversation. So.
Okay, thank you.
Here it is.
I have something I'd like to add and just have this because we won't have her necessarily here tomorrow, so I wanted to include this as part of the conversation for today. Now, we know the county is the body who is charged with the acceptance of, impact fees. And so the language of statute 163.31801, and then down under that G section I was discussing earlier, says the local government jurisdiction has held not less than 2 publicly noticed workshops. And I understand you said that that's us, not the board, not the Board of County Commissioners. Then in the very next thing on number 3, it says the impact fee increase ordinance is approved by at least a 2/3 vote of the governing body. So are we drawing a distinction between the local government jurisdiction,
Yeah,
us, and the local governing body,
what,
being the county commission?
right, what the other jurisdictions so far did, for example, Volusia County schools used the extraordinary circumstances. School district held 2 workshops, and then they took their recommendation to the board. Actually, in their case, they adopted, so that's a little different. Who else? Let me see, it was
Well,
mostly.
it would say that we have to adopt it anyway, because
Right.
it's,
That was the premise of my question earlier, is what you're hinting at, Attorney Powers. That's why I was a little, and I think Chair Campbell had the same, it's not quite clear.
Actually, a lot of things about that bill is not.
yeah, I'm going to do some independent analysis on this, and I'll report to the board regarding those couple of issues tomorrow when we rejoin, because I believe it's important that our interpretation be accurate and correct based on statutory construction. I also don't want to rely on what another county did as our map. I mean, it can be certainly guidance, but I want to ensure that what we're doing crosses the T's and dots the I's appropriately.
Yes.
So I'll send an email and ask if you have any, if you don't mind, I'll send an email that says that do you take this the same way I do? Give you any research I've got, we can discuss, and then I'll report back to the board tomorrow during our session as well.
Thank you.
Okay, Vice Chair.
Thanks. It kind of reminds me of the getting permission to put the funding referendum on the ballot. You know, there were certain procedures we needed to follow, and I think for the last one, we weren't unanimous as a board, but it was a majority vote, and so it went to the county, and then they approved that the referendum go on the ballot, and forward it went. So that would be my question too, is that for this situation, do we need to be, I'm hoping that we will be unanimous, because I think that's important, you know, that to show that we're all in support of whatever we decide. But that would be one question I would have is, does it require a 2/3 vote, or what is it, to even go on to the county? And then with the county, it's a 2/3 vote, that seems to be clear, right?
Yes.
Okay. So just the mechanics behind.
And again, depending on the timeline,
Right.
You know, it could take 4 votes, it could take 3 votes. It also, if it's in July, it's going to be 3. So, yeah, and I'm speaking of the county, not of us. Okay, well, I think that if there's no further questions, then I do want to open it up to public comment. If there is anyone in the audience that would like to speak again, welcome back, Ms. Straub.
Good afternoon again, Tracy Straub. Just to clarify, and hearing what Attorney Powers was saying, if it requires the Marion County Board of County Commissioners to adopt by ordinance, that board will also have to have noticing requirements. And I think it's a 10-day minimum noticing requirement for that. So just looking at your dates and what you're trying to accomplish, we would really need to be on our game very quickly. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We will have additional information coming tomorrow. Anyone else offering public comment? Okay, seeing none, we will go on to board comments and concerns, starting with the board clerk's office. Anything? Attorney Powers?
No, thank you. I've got some marching orders. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Gullett?
Nothing additional. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Dr. James?
No additional comment. Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Reverend Cummings?
No comments.
Thank you. Ms. Conrad?
Wow, we didn't write this on the calendar. There's never happens. Just real quick, thank you again for your work. So much information, so much input. But I also want to just say, as we wound up graduations this last Saturday, it really was a privilege to be a part of the celebration that took place for each school. And so congratulations, graduates. And also, as you drive around town, you can tell that summer has started. You see kids out playing in the yard, running around and playing tag. And so it just feels good. So be safe and have a great summer.
Thank you, Ms. Conrad. Vice Chair Thrower.
Yeah, thank you. Just working hard with our community partners to make great things happen. That's all I have.
Absolutely, thank you. And my only comment in tandem with the graduations, congratulations to all of our graduates again, and congratulations to all of our retirees. Public Ed Foundation had a wonderful district retiree celebration this morning, and thank you to them. And thank you again to our consultant here, who has provided us with lots of information that we can now take, and I'm looking forward to seeing all the work that the team has put in using this information and bringing us recommendations tomorrow. So with that, I believe we'll be adjourned for today. Thank you so much. 2:41 p.m.